There are two things going on during the same general time frame, and we don't really have time to go all the way through both of them tonight, but we'll go through the first one and probably get into the second one a little bit, and then finish it up, Lord willing, next week. But the two things that are going on. God is using Joseph to make Pharaoh rich. The nation of Egypt is about to have a windfall to end all windfalls. Because he told Pharaoh in advance about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, Pharaoh was able to hire Joseph and put him in charge and get things ready so that they had a tremendous amount laid by in store. There was a lot of stuff in Egypt and very little anywhere else, because this wasn't, they didn't have CNN, and there wasn't a report, special report from the capital in Egypt to tell everybody everywhere else what was about to happen. So this was an inside job. And because Joseph knows and because he's in charge, things are set in order so that Pharaoh is going to get rich. The other thing that's going on at about the same time is that God was using Joseph to move Israel into Egypt. Eventually they'll settle in the land of Goshen. But we'll only get to a little bit of the second one. We'll talk more about the first one. The ways that Pharaoh got rich, and we're going to have to skip around just a little bit in the text to get all of the different ways, but there's 4 different things that Joseph does that eventually not only make Pharaoh rich, but keep Pharaoh rich for a long time to come. So we're going to start in Genesis 41:53. 41:53. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but the whole land of Egypt, there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, because the famine was severe throughout all of Egypt. And all of the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. Now just imagine how slowly this news spread. Right? You've got a very widespread famine, probably reaching from Damascus all the way down to the tip of Africa. Everybody everywhere is having a famine. And as a result, travelers who are going through Egypt are figuring out, wait a minute, we don't have anything where we are, but they've got food in Egypt. So when they get back home, they tell people, and if they're traveling to a foreign destination, they get there and they tell people. So folks are slowly getting the message that there is actually some food in Egypt. And if you're willing to travel that far to get food, what does that tell you about your own situation? Things are bad, right? So they're having to travel to get what they need. And as a result, Pharaoh begins to get money from everywhere else, right? Not just from the Egyptians, but from everybody else that's under the problem of this famine. So, number one, Joseph makes Pharaoh rich monetarily. He's got a good cash flow going in the kingdom right about then. Look at chapter 47. Have to kind of skip over a lot of Joseph's brothers coming to Egypt and the things that were going on there. 47:16. 15. When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all of Egypt came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your very eyes? Our money is all gone." "Then bring your livestock," said Joseph. "I will send you food in exchange for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their sheep and their goats, their cattle and their donkeys. He bought them throughout that year with food in exchange for their livestock. Okay, if you are out of money, you can't buy seeds. If you're out of livestock, you couldn't plant it if you had it. So the Egyptians are now too deep into being able to work their own way out of this thing. They're going to have Pharaoh's help for a long time to come. This isn't just a temporary problem that they're having. This is going to get more and more long term. So year one, they pay for it with money. Year two, they pay for it with livestock. Year three, look at verse 18. Verse 18. When that year was over, they came to him the following year and said, "We cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there's nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and with our land we will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and so that the land may not become desolate." Now, what do we know about this famine? We're 3 years in. We got 4 more years. Right? So whatever he sells them, not going to do them a bit of good. If they're able to plant the seed on their land, they're still not going to make any crops. Everything is against them. Everything is in favor of the Pharaoh. Okay? Keep going, verse 20. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, which is interesting because I always thought of Egypt as being one of those things where the emperor just owned everything. But evidently the private ownership for a while, and now the monarch has control of everything. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment Pharaoh gave them. That's why they didn't have to sell their land. That's interesting to me. The ancient Egyptians had a system wherein the religion of the land was taken care of, paid for. Think 1600s England. Right? If you're part of the Anglican Church, you're the official church of the state, and the state takes care of you. Everybody else, the Pilgrims, the Anabaptists, all those folks that were not the Church of England, then had to fend for themselves. They were subject to taxation. The official church was not. It's also interesting to me that this is Joseph's wife's daddy's business. He is a priest of On, right? So his family is not getting taxed, which means that Joseph's wife is exempt by proxy. So I don't figure Joseph was paying much tax those days, but all of those around him were exempt from paying these taxes, or exempt from having to sell their land because they were getting a stipend from the government. So you've got money, and you've got livestock, and you've got the people now in indentured servitude. And again, think 1600s England, where you had a landowner that owned everything, and then the serfs just basically worked for the landowner. Subsistence living. You just made enough to get by, and that was about as good as you could do. So what's Joseph going to give to the people in return? Look at verse 23. Joseph said to the people, "Now that I've bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you, so that you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it," that's 20%, "to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and as food for yourselves and your household and your children. You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as a law concerning the land of Egypt, still in force today. So when Genesis was written, this would be another 400 to 500 years after the things that were taking place here. Still in effect in the land of Egypt, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. So the religious organization there, the different gods and goddesses of Egypt were exempt from these taxations, and they didn't have to sell their land because Pharaoh was taking care of them. So all of those things are in Pharaoh's favor. Right? The people of Egypt, they're beat down. They've got nothing left. Pharaoh's getting richer and richer and richer. Now this dynasty doesn't last a tremendously long time. It only, I don't remember the exact dates, but a few hundred years. So it wasn't that they had enough money and enough clout that they just went on forever and ever. But at least at this point, Joseph has made Pharaoh extraordinarily wealthy, probably the most wealthy regent anywhere in the area. Okay? So that's going on. And at the same time, there are people in Canaan where also, this would be several hundred miles to the north, who are also in the middle of this famine. Very widespread, lots of problems. And this may be more of the reason for God bringing the famine than anything else. Right? We have to conjecture. I don't know that there was any falling out between God and this particular Pharaoh. Now later on there is, but between God and this Pharaoh, it seems like Joseph was the go-between. He was under the blessing of God, so the people that were around him were under the blessing of God. I don't think that was the main intent, although it really worked out well for the Pharaoh. I think the main intent was to fulfill prophecy and to move Israel, to move Jacob and his family to the land of Egypt. They'll be there for about 400 years, and then God will bring them up, squash Egypt, and give them their place in Canaan eventually. So we'll start that process. Look back at Genesis 42. We'll just read the first 5 verses. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." I love the translation of the NIV here. Why are you guys standing around looking at each other? Why don't you go do something useful? Go down to Egypt and get some food for us so that we may live and not die. 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. Now, I'm just going to stop before we read the rest of this. If Joseph is number 12 and only 10 go, who's the number 11 that doesn't go? Can you guess? Benjamin, he's not going anywhere, right? Jacob has lost Joseph, and now Benjamin is uber precious. There's nothing he's going to let happen to Benjamin if he can help it at all. So he keeps Benjamin at home with him. The other 10 sons go. Jacob would not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now, we've got tunnel vision. We're just looking at Jacob and his family. But remember, there were lots of other people in Canaan who were without food at this time too. There were probably caravans of people going back and forth. So when these 10 boys get together and make the trip to Egypt, they're not unusual. They are very similar to a lot of other people who are in the same condition, but they're not going to get the same kind of treatment when they get there. Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all of its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Now he is going to put them through so many hoops, and he's just going to stick it to them before he ever allows them to know who he is. He's going to start out by accusing them of being spies. You're not really who you say you are. You've come to spy the land of Egypt, to find some weakness in us because we've got grain and you don't. Now you think you're going to attack us and take what belongs to us. Why don't his brothers know who Joseph is? They walk in, Joseph immediately knows his brothers, but his brothers don't know Joseph. And I've got I've got 4 things that I wrote down. What do you got? He's Egyptian. He's bald-headed and clean-shaven. All right, so he doesn't look like he belongs to Jacob. How long has it been since they've seen each other? About 20 years. It's been about 20 years since they've seen each other. So people change in 20 years. He didn't look like the little kid that they sold into slavery, and they certainly were not expecting to see him. Now, occasionally you run into somebody in the wrong place, and you know them, and you know them, but they're in the wrong place. Joseph, they were clueless. They had no idea who he was, but he immediately knew who they were. And whether this was God at work or whether this was just the way things turned out, he absolutely messes with them for months. This isn't something that goes on for 10 minutes and then he goes, oh, fooled you, I'm really your brother. This goes on for months before he finally allows them to know who he is. So he says, tell me your story. He said, well, we were 12 brothers, and one of our brothers is gone, dead, finite, and one of our brothers had to stay at home with Daddy. But the 10 of us that are here, we represent the family. Joseph says, you're lying to me, you're a bunch of crooks, you're a bunch of spies trying to figure out how you can get in to Egypt and take what rightfully belongs to us. And no amount of pleading, no amount of retelling of the story ever made any difference to Joseph. And he finally says, I tell you what, I'll give you the stuff, and you can take your stuff you've purchased and go home, but one of you has to stay here so that the next time you come before me, you better have your other brother. You tell me that there's 11 of you, you better show up with the other brother, or this one stays in jail. Who does he choose to put into jail? He takes Simeon. He puts Simeon in jail. Now, I looked to try to find a real good reason why Simeon needed to be the one to be put in jail. I would have chosen Judah. Right? Judah is the one that when the Ishmaelites were coming by, Judah says, why shouldn't we make some money out of this deal? Let's sell him. Right? That's Judah. But Simeon is the one that gets taken hostage. He puts him in the prison and he says, I'm not going to let him out until you prove to me who you are. So it's going to be several months before they're actually able to do that. Just to go back to Canaan and come back to Egypt, just to make the round trip, was going to be several weeks. And then add to that the fact that Daddy's not going to let Benjamin go anywhere if he can help it. But why Simeon? I looked at a few commentaries to see why people thought he might have kept him in particular. One of the possibilities was that maybe it went back to that Shechem thing. You remember when Dinah was raped by the son of the ruler of Shechem? And it was Simeon and Judah that went in and killed the men of Shechem to avenge their sister. And so some of the commentators said, well, maybe it was because Simeon was involved in that. Well, Judah was standing there too. Right? And again, I would have chosen Judah just because Judah was the one that said, hey, let's sell him into slavery. But he takes Simeon. Another possibility, and this is the one I kind of like, is that when Judah says, let's sell him into slavery, Reuben is not there. Right? Reuben is the oldest. And Reuben said, let's put him over here in this pit. And in Reuben's mind, he was going to come back and get him and take him home. When he comes back from wherever it was that he went, maybe it was his shift to go watch the sheep. When he comes back, they've already done this, and they've already gotten rid of Joseph to the Midianite traders. The oldest brother who was there at the time was Simeon. Right? Reuben is the oldest, then Simeon, then Judah, then Levi, or Levi, then Judah. Right? So he should have been the one kind of in charge of what was going on back at base camp while Reuben was gone. And it may be that Joseph blamed Simeon for allowing Judah to do what he did. Judah and Simeon seem to have been very close. They were born, one after the other to, I lost her name, not Rachel, Leah. They were born back to back to Leah, so they were close in age and evidently were close as brothers as well. Answer is We don't know. But he chose Simeon, and he kept Simeon, who was the oldest, next to Reuben, of Jacob's other wife. Okay? So, we don't know. Look at chapter 42, verse 21. 42:21. Here's what they thought was going on. They said to one another, "Surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. And that's why this distress has come on us." We find out a little bit more about that event when they sold him to the Midianites. The scriptures where it happens are very matter of fact. Right? We don't hear from Joseph. We hear from the brothers. The brothers saw him coming from a long way out, and they said, "Look, there's that dreamer. Let's kill him and tell Daddy he died." Right? He gets there. Reuben kind of intervenes, puts him in the pit. While he's gone, Judah says, "Let's sell him." They sell him. And it's all very clinical, just a description of this happened, and this happened, and this happened. But the brothers now kind of tell on themselves. They said, "Do you remember how he pleaded with us?" So you've got this next to the youngest brother, for a while the baby brother of their family, and he's pleading with his older brothers, "Don't do this to me. Please don't sell me. Please don't let me go." Can you imagine Joseph being dragged off by the traders, still trying to get his brothers to listen to him, to change their mind? This is the only place we get that. The other telling of what happened is very clinical. There's not much going on. Here, the brothers tell on themselves that they were willing to sell him, not only, I mean, that's bad enough, but even though he was crying out to them, even though he was begging them to have mercy on him and not to sell him. So he allows them to leave the first time, and as they leave the first time, he tells his attendants, "Take the silver that they gave you for the grain and put it back in their sacks and send them away." Right? So they've got fully loaded grain bags, and in those grain bags are the bags of silver that they brought to pay for the grain. And they don't know it until they get part of the way home. One of them opens up a sack and finds silver. So they're a little worried that the silver is there. They get all the way home, and when they're reporting to their father Jacob and unloading the grain that they bought, every last one of them has their coins in their bag of grain. What do you think they thought was going on? The man who was in charge, they call him the Lord of the land. The Lord of the land, the guy who was in charge, called us spies. He said he wouldn't believe us, and he kept Simeon as collateral until we bring Benjamin. And here we have all this silver that we thought we had paid for our grain. And so we'll have to stop here, but the response that Jacob has to what went on is very telling. Look at verse 35, chapter 42, verse 35. As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Now, I love the way he phrases this. Right? Don't miss it. Joseph is no more. He knows Joseph is dead. Simeon is no more. Why does he say Simeon is no more? They just told him Simeon's alive. He's in the jail waiting on us to bring the baby brother. Well, Simeon's gone. We're not sending the baby brother. There's nothing, there's no equality between Benjamin and Simeon. Right? There's no equal value between the two. For a parent, and I guess all of us have to wrestle with this, I don't know, how many single children families do we have? Any of y'all have an only child? No? Just us? We can say that Beth is our favorite, because she's the only one we got. But everybody else, I defy you to tell me that you didn't like one of them just a little bit more than you did the other one. One of them was easier to raise. One of them was a nicer kid. Something, right? There's no hint that Jacob thinks equally of Simeon and Benjamin. Simeon had to go to jail. He's just gone. Forget him, because Benjamin is staying here. I'm keeping Benjamin. And so Reuben said to his father, you can put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. But Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead. He's the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you're taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. So we have another equation. Which is more important, 2 of Reuben's sons or Benjamin? Benjamin. I don't care about your kids. I care about my kid. I care about Benjamin. And your kids don't equate. So he's not about to let him go, no matter what Reuben says. And later on, Judah will make the same kind of promise that he can take care of him and make sure that he returns. Until they're absolutely desperate, Jacob is not about to let him out of his sight. So we'll stop right there, and Lord willing, pick up with that next week.